This is Carolina Business Review. Major support provided by High Point University, the premier life skills university focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Can you hear that? Not a peep from political ads or pop-up videos or texts or phone calls. Not even much cocktail party chatter about it. I'm Chris William, and for us as a community and a region, getting back to the business at hand and the issues of everyday life are what is going on now and what we will continue to lay out here in this dialogue right now. And in a moment, we will start again. Later on this program, South Carolina's Department of Transportation boss, Justin Powell, joins us.
Major funding also by Foundation for the Carolinas, a catalyst for philanthropy and driver of civic engagement, helping individuals, nonprofits, and companies bring their charitable visions to life. Truliant Federal Credit Union, proudly serving the Carolinas since 1952 by focusing on what truly matters, our members' financial success. Welcome to Brighter Banking. And Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation on which our communities improve and grow. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Patrick Woodie from the NC Rural Center, Christopher Finn of South Carolina I-77 Alliance, and special guest Justin P. Powell, South Carolina Transportation Secretary.
Hello, welcome again to our program. Gentlemen, Patrick, good to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Christopher, welcome. We hope we don't scare you off, and we hope we can get you back.
I appreciate it.
Joining us.
Thanks so much.
Let's see. All right, so Patrick, here we are. North Carolina Rural Center and all of these things around rural Carolinas. One of the my guess would be one of the biggest liabilities at this point was the effect of the hurricane, certainly in western North Carolina and the upstate of South Carolina. But more importantly, as we go into the holiday season, Christmas trees are a very big business for the Carolinas and certainly North Carolina. Is that an impact?
Yeah, there absolutely were impacts. You know, we are one of the biggest Christmas tree growing states in the country. And a few of our counties produce a pretty high percentage of the Christmas trees grown in the United States. Definitely there were impacts in a lot of different ways. It shows up in terms of damage to the crop and impacts in terms of being able to get to the crop and get it out. A lot of, as you well know, and we may even talk a little about the transportation impacts of Helene and getting things back to normal. So crop damage, but there will be Christmas trees. I've already seen them, you know, trees tied to roofs coming out of the mountains. That's a really good thing to see. And I know those farmers are working as hard as they can to get back to as normal a situation as they can at their peak time of the year, as you well know.
Peak time of the year. Any wild guess on percentage of impact?
I have not heard numbers. I'm sure if they probably are available. I have not heard them. I have anecdotally had several conversations about big tree farmers that I know in the northwestern part of our state that are really trying to figure out how to get back into business and how to not lose everything, you know, during this peak time of the year.
Christopher, is there any meaningful fallout for that? And I call it the column between Charlotte and Columbia. It's the I-77 Alliance, of course, that you lead. Is there any meaningful fallout from the storms in September that you think have a long-lasting effect for that area that you're in?
Specifically for our region, we were somewhat fortunate in regards to the storms. Not a lot of loss to infrastructure or the kind of electric grid around our area. So.
Yeah, and Scout Motors, highly touted, very exciting, huge impact, huge economic development flag in the ground for you all. Yep. What's the status of that project?
It's coming along. So recently we I've heard some estimates in regard to some of the projections for production, and they're looking possibly to, reach a point where they're at or exceeding, counts at the BMW plant up in Spartanburg. So really what we're looking forward to is the potential spin-off from all of that. So just recently we sent some representatives out to Germany for the IZB, which is the International Suppliers Fair. And that got us in front of a lot of companies that are looking to, directly work with Volkswagen and with Scout Motors on this project. So pretty excited for that.
Yeah, I know you are. That's. I mean, there was a lot of talk about it, and then of course it's coming. Do you get the sense that they're on track for the timeline?
Yes,
they're going to hit what they need to hit.
Looking to start production, I believe it was 2027, and that hasn't changed.
Any big disruptions? Just in the last 30 seconds or so here before we bring our guest on, Patrick. Any big disruptions that aren't already known for rural parts of North Carolina now heading into fourth quarter beyond what we already know the impact of the storm is going to be? What do you think the biggest bogey for them is going to be?
I think certainly we keep a look, we're always looking out for layoffs in rural businesses, and we track those. We've seen a little bit of an uptick of things.
More than
a little
urban
indication of things slowing down a little bit. But nothing that I think is too disturbing. There are some concerns around some of the big announcements that have happened in North Carolina, and maybe schedules changing a little bit. Nothing major that would affect projects that I've heard of, but certainly an indication that schedules may be changing a little bit.
All right. Guys, stay with us. We're going to bring our guest on. Before we do that, he has the top job in transportation and infrastructure in the Old North State in North Carolina. He's going to be joining us. His name is Joey Hopkins. Joey is not new to the agency, and he's not new to the industry of transportation and infrastructure. He is the Secretary of Transportation. He will be our guest on this program. And then also talk about being strapped on the edge of this helicopter blade. Harry Sideris, the president of Duke Energy, as Duke was literally first responder after the hurricanes that came through, and I say hurricanes plural, that came through the Carolinas this past hurricane season. Harry Sideris will talk about what Duke Energy has done, where they are, how they're financing it, et cetera, and that's also on this program. Our guest may be new to the top job, but he is certainly not new in the business of transportation, and he's certainly not new to those in and around infrastructure in the Carolinas, and specifically in South Carolina. Prior to his appointment and confirmation, he was the chief operating officer to the agency during former Secretary Christy Hall's tenure. Joining us now is the South Carolina Secretary of Transportation, Justin Powell. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Great to be up here.
I have to say, and I'm sorry, sir, but I have to bring this up, that you were late to the production because you got stuck in traffic. That seems poetic. Is that, when that happens to you, Mr. Secretary, and I'm not making light of it, but when that happens to you, what goes through your mind about traffic?
Well, I mean, I think it's just the challenge of growth that we're facing both in North Carolina and South Carolina. Now, I'll say I got stuck in traffic on the North Carolina side of the line.
I knew that was coming.
And I'll call my friend Joey Hopkins about that later. But, I think that just makes you realize the importance of transportation, how you've got to move your system forward, deal with that growth, deal with that congestion, because it affects people's lives. I mean, it affects you getting to school, getting to work. Those minutes matter, and it certainly mattered for me being a few minutes late to the production here today.
And of course, that's not an emergency problem for us, but it just, as I said, it seemed a little poetic. So, Secretary Powell, the idea that North Carolina has gotten a lot of press because of the tragic loss around Hurricane Helene, but South Carolina has had your fair share, their fair share. What's the current status? What by the numbers, what were the big numbers of impact, and how do you start to remediate or ameliorate that?
Sure. Certainly we don't have the level of damage that our friends in North Carolina had in Western North Carolina with the washouts of the roads and the severe flooding. But Hurricane Helene was really impactful for South Carolina as well. So we dealt with tropical storm force, hurricane force winds coming into a part of the state that doesn't normally get hurricanes. We're used to hurricanes in Charleston and Myrtle Beach. We're not necessarily used to hurricanes in Greenwood and Gaffney. So what we saw was a tremendous amount of debris fell. We've already collected almost 1 million cubic yards of debris, and we know we're just getting started that coming up from that. During the peak of the storm, we actually had about half of the power meters out across South Carolina. So a lot of teamwork ended up happening between DOT and our power companies to start restoring electricity. Where our crews could help on cutting, they worked on the lines. In terms of damages, we did have some, nowhere near what my friends up in North Carolina have, but it's probably around $50 million worth of damage that we're dealing with, and we're moving ahead with emergency procurements and starting to get those repairs underway as quickly as possible.
The Palmetto State has always been, I promise I'm going to give you both a chance here to jump in, but the Palmetto State's always been pretty progressive about finding creative ways to get transportation funding.
Yeah.
But when this happens, when you have a natural disaster or an act of God, obviously the funding has to come from somewhere to meet that need. How do you finance these repairs?
Well, see, I think we work hard on managing our cash. We work hard on managing our budget, recognizing that things like this happen. So we were fortunate that we do have basically the cash on hand to pay for the expense, so that there's no question about our response, being able to do what the people need us to do. At the end of the day, many of these expenses will get reimbursed by the Federal Highway Administration for a lot of our road damages, and then by the Federal Emergency Management Agency for the debris and other damages we've got. So, but there's a lag. It takes up to a year, 2, 3 years before you start seeing those dollars. So we take a lot of pride in how we've managed our finances, so that we're going to be able to float through this experience without necessarily interrupting the rest of our construction program.
Did you have to go to the State House to ask for funds?
No, we've been able to work within what we already have. So we've been able to work with what we have, and certainly there'll be a dialogue with the General Assembly. I think as the expense related to Helene comes into full view, as everybody starts telling their bills. But in the immediate term, we're able to manage through it.
Patrick, question.
So I'm the rural economic development guy, and we certainly look at physical infrastructure as one of the key building blocks of economic development. Transportation is a big piece of that physical infrastructure piece. I'd love your perspective. We're both very rural states, North and South Carolina, a lot of vibrant, growing cities that are surrounded by rural areas. The transportation needs in rural areas are different than those in urban areas. We struggle really with the planning part and trying to get projects through to funding and then ultimately through to completion, because just by definition of being rural, one of the things we struggle with is having the capacity, human resource and financial and otherwise, to be able to aggressively develop projects and plan for them. And I wonder if you found, what's your perspective of that, and have you found unique ways that rural communities are able to get their priorities addressed?
Sure. So certainly in South Carolina, we've been working on our 10-year plan. So that started under former Secretary Hall. It really came after the 2017 roads bill was passed by the General Assembly that dramatically increased the state funding that came into DOT. I'll share a couple things that we've been doing on supporting rural communities. First and foremost, our interstate capacity program that we have. So we talk a lot about Malfunction Junction in Columbia, the 526 project in Charleston, but a couple key projects going on right now are widening I-26 between Columbia and Charleston. Tremendous volume of traffic, but a very rural area that we have routine breakdowns on the interstate there. Same thing happening on I-95. We really had to look at it a little bit differently than we normally do. That we had to look at the truck volume as opposed to the car volume coming through to see that we needed to do that. A second really big thing we've been doing has been trying to tackle, South Carolina has the unfortunate distinction of having the nation's worst rural road fatality rate. And so actually when that 2017 roads bill was passed, the General Assembly actually required us to put $50 million per year specifically for rural road safety projects. So we have gotten over 1,100 miles of projects across South Carolina, all in our rural areas, really to start bringing those numbers down. And we're seeing the results from it. So we've gotten, on those projects that have been completed, we've seen a 20% reduction in the fatalities that occur on those roads. So a tremendous progress there. And then a third, we do a lot with metropolitan planning organizations in our urban areas, but we have council of governments that represent the interests of our rural areas. And so we've, following passage of the federal infrastructure bill a few years ago, we've increased the amount of money that we're going to that. And one of the things that we were committed to was making sure that there was a minimum amount that every region got of $5 million per year that they could invest in needs, not only just what Charleston and Greenville need, but making sure that Abbeville and Bamberg got attention as well.
Yeah, I'm promising to give you a chance here, Christopher. Let me just follow up quickly. It almost sounds like, and I want to put words in your mouth, but it almost sounds like this is a pretty flush time financially for DOT. I mean, it seems like you've got a lot of money to do these priorities. Is that fair to say?
Well, see, I think, the General Assembly back in 2017 passed their 2017 roads bill, really did help us bring about $600 to $700 million into the agency. That certainly helped us do that. There was the federal infrastructure bill that got passed 3 years ago. That's been helpful too. I think on the flip side, though, while the dollars have increased, we've seen a pretty significant increase in inflation over the past few years.
From raw materials.
From raw materials, labor, all of those challenges, just like any other business. So we used to be able to back when the bill was passed, 2017 roads bill was passed, we could buy 114 miles of 2-lane repaving with the dollars we had with 1 penny of the gas tax. Today, it's 89 miles we can buy with that same penny. Just that pricing's there. So, yeah, there's more money and mobility to do more projects, but things are definitely much more expensive than they used to be.
Thank you, Chris. Sorry to interrupt. Please go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, my curiosity with Department of Transportation is how's the coordination with North Carolina? I mean, our region being right on the border with Charlotte, we're definitely impacted by the policies and by the planning and the initiatives that they have there. But is that coordinated with South Carolina, especially where those overlap?
So no, I have a DOT. Our most partnered DOT in South Carolina is really North Carolina DOT. We share a long border with each other. We do the same thing with our friends in Georgia, long border on the Savannah River. And so when we have projects coming together on either side of the border, we're talking to each other. We're working on it. In fact, we're about to go, and I'll talk about the Georgia side of the line just because it's most fresh in my mind, but we're about to widen I-95 on the Georgia border down by Savannah. We're actually, the bridge is in Georgia, and the rest of the project is in South Carolina. So Georgia will be asking us to build the project on their side of the line and vice versa. And we do that from time to time, but always a robust dialogue. There's a lot of things going on, particularly in the Charlotte area, that you can't think about one without the other.
Exactly. Yep.
Andrew.
Yeah, I think we think of roads and bridges when we think about transportation, but it is multimodal. There's a lot going on there. And one thing I particularly noticed, at least on the North Carolina side, the impacts, the response to the devastation of Helene would have been far slower had it not been for the presence and availability and the infrastructure that's represented in our small airports, regional and local. They played really a critical role in getting supplies in there fast. They don't get a lot of attention.
Sure.
And I just wonder, your perspective of the role that those small airports play.
Well, no, I mean, I think in South Carolina, the Department of Transportation is a sister to the Aeronautics Commission, which handles a lot of that GA work with the general aviation airports. But I think you see that relationship is always there. You can't think about it stopping at the airport boundary from where we start.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot of work right now, and Charleston International working together on some road projects to improve access really for the Boeing facility down there. And I'll say, during Helene, when I toured around with Governor McMaster, one of the flights I took was to go over the Donaldson Center, which is a general aviation airport, but it's a big, it's now the South Carolina Aviation, it says SC-TAC now, but they have airfield there as well, and what you saw was just all the resources that were being staged, not necessarily to help South Carolina, because it was easier to get into Western North Carolina from South Carolina during that time. So that importance and that criticality is so important.
Your Honor, when you talk about the big strategies for the state of South Carolina and you're coordinating all these efforts, but then do you, and this is probably not the right way to ask it, but I think where we're going to be going here. Do you get stymied or do you get bogged down in issues like trying to get the Mark Clark extension done in Charleston, or the Blythewood interchange, or Cross Carolina Crossroads, or the Malfunction Junction? I mean, do those type of projects, when they run into local opposition, or when they get a no vote from the local county or the city, does that end up making you have to zig or zag?
No, I mean, I think I think that makes the job fun to a certain extent. I think it's what we do but what I would say is, transportation touches everybody at the end of the day. Transportation, whether you drive or not, you rely upon state highways to get the goods and services to your home, to get to where you need to go. And part of that process is a robust public participation process, making sure that whether it be in a sales tax referendum like occurred in Charleston, or just in the public participation process. I'm thinking about the Scout project. There was a robust dialogue in that community about how that interchange was going to look, how we were going to deal with that infrastructure. And I think it was because of that public feedback we actually got a better product at the end of the day. And I think that's why we go through the process, why we ask that public feedback and those opportunities. But you have a large portfolio. South Carolina now has $6 billion under construction. 10 years ago, it was $1 billion. So your plate's always full with making sure, trying to keep all those projects moving forward, keeping that program moving forward, and doing it in a way that helps serve the public interest as we go along.
Mm-hmm. Christopher, question?
Yeah. Kind of related to the Blythewood Exchange or Volvo, I feel like the Department of Transportation is a pretty strong ally in economic development. And I'm not really sure if it's the same structure, with other states. I did similar roles up in upstate New York, and the DOT was definitely not as involved in projects or in bringing solutions that might be a part of a final piece that attracts a company to come to an area. So do you keep track of kind of best practices or how you guys rank compared to other DOTs in that regard?
Well, I can often only just talk about South Carolina, but what I would say is I view South Carolina, when it comes to economic development, we're a team sport. That the lines between the Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation, Department of Parks, Recreation, Tourism, all those folks that have a play, I think we look at as a team sport, and it's even in law. So I'm a member of the coordinating council led by Secretary Lightsey. I'm talking with the Department of Commerce regularly, and I think Scout was a real example of that, because without the efforts of the Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, the Richland County, all of those partners in making that project happen, we wouldn't be where we are today with that project still on track. Our construction project to build the new interchange and all the new access roads into Blythewood basically are on track. $200 million project that really basically started to be done in 2027, that we started basically a year and a half ago from when that project was announced. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's aggressive. We have about 2 minutes left. Final question.
Well, I really wonder, revenue-wise, in terms of making some decisions, your General Assembly's a little ahead of ours in making some strategic decisions about long-term financing the transportation. Wonder if you have any advice for North Carolina, pros or cons about some of the big considerations when we think about revenue streams that are going to be stable or growing as we look to the future.
Coming from a guy that was stuck in traffic in Charlotte just a few minutes ago.
What I would say is this: I think every state is unique in what their transportation needs. North Carolina and South Carolina are unique amongst our peers in other states because we have both of us have 2 of the 4 largest state highway networks in the country. So your needs are going to be different. But that North Carolina has got a different portfolio than we do. I think you've got to look at in any discussion about transportation funding is predictability. You want to make sure that the contractors and the industry feels confident that that revenue keeps coming in, is able to provide the project. We call it feed the beast. We've got to make sure that we can keep things going. So predictability, consistency, maintaining the growth with inflation is important. So I think when you look at that, regardless of whether you're in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, wherever, those type of issues have really got to be at the forefront if you want to make sure that you have that continued investment in your system.
In about less than 60 seconds, you got enough workers? You're looking for talent?
So, I think everybody's dealing with a labor challenge. We actually have been doing really well and making some adjustments on our salaries and our entry pay that we've been able to at least on our internal staff from that. But I think it's a challenge not only in South Carolina, North Carolina, globally, just the availability of workers, of people interested in working outside, working on making big projects happen. There's a lot of competition for labor right now. And so I think we've been working in South Carolina with our general contractors. They have the Be Pro, Be Proud effort there to encourage people to go into the trades, because I think we've got to keep that investment in our people going to keep this industry going well.
Secretary Powell, thank you for making the trip. I mean, I know it's not a small commitment, and thanks for taking the time. Please come back. We have more to unpack around that, but thank you. Nice to see you, sir. And please give our best to former Secretary Hall. She's, as you well know, you worked for her for a while, but
no, she was great, and I really do appreciate y'all having me up here.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Christopher, thanks for making the trip. Come back, please.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Patrick, of course, you're always welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Until next week, I'm Chris Woodie, and we hope your weekend is good. Good night.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, Truliant Federal Credit Union, Foundation for the Carolinas, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, High Point University, and by viewers like you. Thank you.